From the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing at The Ohio State University, this is Writer's Talk. I'm Doug Dangler. Andrew Hudgins, Professor of Creative Writing at The Ohio State University, is the author of 6 books of poetry, including Saints and Strangers, a 1985 Pulitzer Prize finalist. Welcome, Andrew, to Writer's Talk.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's start with your most recently published book. It's called Shut Up, You're Fine, Poems for Very, Very Bad Children. Now, while the title is unusual, I want to assure everyone that the book is full of heartwarming poems about children, such as The Dying Boy's Lament, I Think of Being in the Grave, and When Granddad Says, Please Kill Me. What was your elevator talk while you were writing these poems?
I'd been working on them for about 8 years, and it was only after a while that people started to say, how would you describe this book? And so I had to sit down and say that it was like Robert Louis Stevenson writing his childhood children's poems for South Park. Mm-hmm. And I'd always hated Robert Louis Stevens' children's poems. They seemed syrupy to me, and I'd always got a kick out of Beavis and Butthead, South Park, Family Guy, The Simpsons, things like that.
Mm-hmm. See, I assumed that these books followed from some really bad experiences with children.
That too.
I
had taught 6th grade for a year, and then I committed suicide.
Mm-hmm. And ended up at OSU after
heaven.
Heaven. All right. Well, the poems seem to follow in the footsteps of shock-headed Peter tales, and I found it funny that Amazon appends a subtitle after Shut Up, You're Fine. It's called Instructive Poetry for Very, Very Bad Children. But that doesn't seem to be your intent. I don't think you're trying to instruct children in these.
No. My original subtitle had been Troubling Poems for Troubled Children, which I thought was funny. But Barnes & Noble and Borders didn't. They thought it would attract actual children to read the book. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people use that idea of the pretend that you're writing for children because it's a little more shocking when people think that the poem, somewhere in their brain, they think it was intended for children, mm-hmm. even when it really wasn't.
Right, and so you haven't tested these on children. No children were injured in the.
Actually, one of the poems, which is I forget the title, My Father's Corpse or something like I think is the title, in which it was based on a real incident that I'd written as a serious poem, in which my father would just lie down on the bed, and he wouldn't move, and we would crawl on him until we started thinking it was dead, mm-hmm. and he was pretending to be dead, and then we'd start picking at him and poking at him, trying to get a response out of him. And if you think about it, there's no way this can end well. Mm-hmm. You know, either we're going to end up thinking he's dead, or we're going to do something to make him prove he isn't dead. Mm-hmm. And usually we would go too far, and he would get upset and hurt, physically hurt, and come roaring out of the bed screaming. So I wrote a poem about that, and it's been used by the NEA in their read aloud program for children. So every now and then I hear about a kid in West Virginia or Montana reading this to a group of assembled parents.
Why would they choose that poem to read to children?
Well, I think because it's funny. Mm-hmm. And I think that kids think it's funny, and parents sometimes get disturbed by it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's because I rhyme quotum and scrotum, mm-hmm. and that's why I think the parents get upset.
It's an odd poem to choose.
And it's why kids like it, because they get to stand in front of their parents and their teachers and say scrotum. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul is enjoying that right now as the sound engineer. Well, what is your favorite poem in this book? What ones are you really interested in?
Oh, they're my babies. I like them all. But one that I can actually read to you is a poem, maybe not as funny as the others, called Margaret and Her Puppy Ralph. Margaret dressed her puppy Ralph in Mama's hot pink beret. She draped pink ribbons on his neck and knelt with him to pray. He wiggled in her chubby arms and tried to lick her face when she dressed him in flannel gowns adorned with bright pink lace. But as her puppy Ralph grew up, he chewed her flannel gown. He gnawed off Barbie's legs and head, then knocked poor Margaret down. He licked her salty tears away while she curled on the ground, wept, hiccuped, sobbed, and caterwauled. So Mom drove to the pound, and Margaret stared across the seat and studied like a scholar the chewed and faded scrap of pink still hanging from Ralph's collar. Now, maybe that's funny, maybe it's not. I happen to think that it's both.
I think it's surprisingly poignant in the collection. That's one that I thought really crossed grounds between being funny in sort of this, like you say, South Park way. There must be a different term for that than South Parkian. But it also was, you know, evoking these real sort of emotional response because the girl's dog has turned out to be, you know, a real problem that they can't deal with, and it's very interesting to consider, you know, that as a sort of transgressive kind of poetry.
That's actually based mildly on something that really happened. My wife and I had a young, cheerful dog, and he loved kids, but he loved them so much he would jump on them and knock them down, and they would fall to the ground, and if they started crying, he was quite happy because they're on the ground, they're easy for him to lick. If they're crying, they have tears, which taste good, apparently. So the kid's screaming, terrified. The dog's happy as a clam. I'm almost laughing, but my friends, whose child it is, are horrified. And a lot of it's perspective, because I knew the dog was not in the least intending to hurt the child.
Yeah, or would leave large pieces of the child at least. So,
for them to take home.
Right, yeah. So what kind of feedback have you gotten about the book with poetry like that?
Mixed. People who think of poetry as only a noble endeavor are upset. And the word that seems to appear most often in reviews is disturbing, which is, I think, kind of funny because there's nothing in this book you wouldn't see in an average 2-hour slice of primetime television, and certainly nothing as wild as what you would hear on a comedy routine on the Comedy Channel.
Okay. Tell me about the illustrations by Barry Moser.
Oh, Barry is a wonderful illustrator, book designer, and I met him at a conference in Santa Fe. We were both working there. I was teaching poetry writing and he was teaching figure drawing, I believe. And I read some of the poems and he laughed and said that he would like to illustrate the book when it came out. I didn't believe him. I was kind of just blown away with this idea. But we were there the next year. He said it again and he said it very seriously. So I was thrilled to have Barry Moser design and illustrate your book. Is you know, a wonderful thing.
Did he choose which ones he wanted to, or did you tell him that I'd like to have this one illustrated in a particular way?
I don't know that anyone's ever done that with Barry, telling them what you want him to do. Barry designed the book, chose what he wanted to illustrate, and did a wonderful job. Okay. I had absolutely no say in what he did, and that made me happy.
Okay. Why did that make you happy? You didn't want to have to dictate?
You realize that you're in the hands of somebody who really, really knows what he's doing. Let him do it.